Montana Territory. 1884, the wind was sharp off the Bitterroot Mountains, and the train hissed like a restless beast as it pulled into the station at Cold Creek. Jessa Mae Morton stepped down from the rail car with her gloved hands wrapped tight around the handle of her single worn suitcase. Her boots hit the platform with a soft thud, and she straightened her back, her brown wool coat tugged close against the cold. 37 years old, and she had finally dared to answer an ad from a widowed rancher in need of a wife. The letter had said he was a man of 50 with steady land and a quiet house, and Jessa had written back with trembling fingers and hoped she had no right to carry. But when she looked around, no one met her eye, no sign with her name, no man waiting. A group of young men loitered near the corner of the depot. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, laughed too loud, tipping his hat back. "Reckon that's her," one said. "Mail order bride for old man Dobbins. Thought he wanted a wife, not a schoolmarm's ghost." Laughter followed, sharp and careless. Jessa's lips pressed tight. She kept walking, her chin high, though her cheeks burned. She had known her age would not win admiration, but she had not expected to feel like something pitied. She found her way to the general store where the owner, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Halpern, offered her a chair and a cup of tea while they waited. "He ain't common," Mrs. Halpern said kindly. "Dobbins passed last week. Stroke took him out quick. No one thought to wire you." Jessa blinked. "He died, afraid so." Her hands trembled around the cup. "I sold everything back home," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go." Mrs. Halpern looked at her with sympathy, but the silence that followed was heavy. Jessa had been let down by death, not cruelty, but the result was the same. She was alone in a place she had never seen before, mocked before she had even found a roof. She stepped outside into the late afternoon light that cut low across the dusty street. The sky had that cold blue look it got before evening dropped like a hammer. She turned to walk, with no destination, no plan, only the echo of laughter and the sharp sting of humiliation in her chest. "Ma'am," she looked up. The man was tall, maybe 25, with dark blonde hair under a weather-worn hat. He held a saddle over one shoulder and looked at her like he had seen the whole scene from a distance and had not liked a bit of it. "I saw what happened back there," he said. "That was cruel." Jessa stared. "You do not need to trouble yourself." "I want to," he said. "Name's Waylon Tate. I work cattle over on the Bar H Ranch. You got somewhere to stay?" She hesitated. "No," he nodded once. "We got a bunkhouse with empty beds. You can have mine for the night. I will sleep in the barn." "I cannot. It is not charity, ma'am. It is the right thing to do." She studied him. He had a quiet confidence, not boastful, and his eyes held no mockery, just steady calm. "I am Jessa Mae Morton," she said. "I know," Waylon said. "I heard the rumors. I also heard you came all the way from Kansas to be a wife." She nodded. "I do not think age matters much," he added. "Not when you carry yourself like you do." Jessa blinked, startled. He tipped his hat. "Come on, before the cold bites harder." The ride back to the Bar H Ranch was quiet. He rode beside her on horseback while she sat in the wagon he had borrowed. The land around them rolled wide and golden, the grass brittle under the weight of early frost. She watched the sway of the horses, her hands still curled in her lap. "You always been in Montana?" she asked. "Born here. Raised by my uncle after my folks died." He looked over. "You, widowed?" "No children. Was a seamstress back in Topeka. Figured I had something left to give." Waylon nodded. "Looks to me like you still do." The bunkhouse was clean and warm, with thick quilts and a tin stove burning low. Jessa sat on the edge of the cot, her hands folded, unsure of what to do next. "You hungry?" Waylon asked. She nodded. He came back with a plate of beans and warm cornbread. She ate slowly, and he sat across the room watching the fire. "You know," he said after a while, "those boys at the station, they act like fools because they do not understand what real strength looks like." She looked up, startled. "I saw it in the way you held your head. You did not let them break you. I felt broken, but you kept walking." She stared at the fire, heart aching with something she had not yet named. He stood, tipped his hat again. "Sleep well, Jessa Mae." The next morning, she woke early to the sound of boots on the porch. Waylon had already brought her a bucket of water and a fresh biscuit wrapped in cloth. "I have been thinking," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Mrs. Halpern says you can sew near anything. I think there is work for you here if you want it. For now. Until you make your next plan." "I would like that," she said softly. Weeks passed. Jessa began taking and mending from the nearby ranches. She earned her keep and more. She cooked sometimes for the ranch hands, and the men grew to respect her not because of her age, but because she worked harder than most and never complained. Waylon came by often, sometimes with questions about repairs, sometimes with supper. He always looked at her like she mattered, like he saw something no one else had taken the time to see. One night, as autumn deepened, he found her in the meadow behind the bunkhouse. She had walked there to feel the air, to let the wind brush her face. "I have been thinking," he said. She turned. He took off his hat, held it in his hands. "I know I am younger, but I also know you are the strongest woman I have ever met, and I do not care what anyone says." Her breath caught. "I do not want you to leave," he said. "I want you to stay with me, if you want that too." She stared, stunned. "You are not too old," he added. "You are just right." She walked to him slowly, heart pounding. She reached up and touched his cheek, fingers trembling. "I never thought someone would look at me like this again," she whispered. "I always have," he said softly. And under the wide Montana sky, with the stars beginning to rise behind them, Jessa leaned into his warmth, and for the first time in a long time, she felt young again. By late November, the ground had hardened beneath a thin crust of snow, and the wind carried the dry scent of pine and smoke. Jessa stood near the edge of the Bar Htkes small corral, watching the horses shift their weight in the cold morning light. Her fingers ached from the chill, but she didn't move. Inside her coat pocket was a letter from her younger sister in Kansas, unopened since yesterday. She wasn't sure what held her back from reading it, only that she wasn't the same woman who had boarded the train weeks ago. And she wasn't ready to be pulled back into that life, even through ink and paper. Footsteps crunched behind her. "You always this quiet in the mornings?" Waylon asked, carrying a bridle over one shoulder. She didn't look at him just yet. "Only since I started listening more than talking." He leaned his arms on the top rail beside her, watching the horses too. "That paint mare's due to foal come spring." "You ever seen it happen?" "Once. Years ago when I was still married. Neighbor's horse went into labor and they needed extra hands. I held the lantern. Then you'll know what to look for." "I remember the sound she made," Jessa said. "Like something old and sacred, not pain exactly, just effort." Waylon nodded. "That's the way of it. Work worth doing always asks for something back." They stood there a while, wind tugging at the loose strands of her hair. She'd stopped pinning it so tightly in the mornings. The first time he'd noticed, he hadn't said anything, but she'd caught the way his gaze softened just for a moment. "Your uncle," she said. "You ever talk about him?" Waylon's jaw shifted. "Not much call to. He died 3 winters back. Got caught in a freeze on his way to town. Mule team found their way home without him. I'm sorry. He raised me straight. Didn't say much, but what he said I've never had to doubt. That kind of man. Sounds like someone who'd admire how you turned out. I try not to think about whether he would or wouldn't. Just keep going the way I was taught." A gust of wind lifted the hem of her skirt and she pressed it down, glancing at him. "You're young, Waylon, but you don't act it. You make that sound like a fault." No, she said. Only an observation. Most men your age are still chasing foolishness. He chuckled, low and without any edge. I chased enough of it by 16 to last me another 20 years. She smiled just a little. You get many letters from home? He asked. Not many. My sister writes, but it's mostly the same news of cousins I barely remember, church socials, someone's boy marrying too young. Why haven't you read this one? I'm not sure I want to know what they think of me now. Waylon picked up a small stone and tossed it toward the fence post. Does it matter? It used to. Maybe it still does. I'd rather know what you think of yourself. She turned to him now, surprised. That's not something men usually ask. I ain't most men. Jessa studied his face, wind-burned, serious, not trying to charm her. Just asking because he wanted to hear the answer. I think I've spent too long apologizing for surviving, she said. For not being young enough or soft enough or enough of something I forgot to even ask what I want. Well, Waylon said, I can't speak for everything. But I know what I see. And what's that? A woman who didn't break when she had every reason to, who's got more use in her hands and heart than most folks, twice as loud. She looked down at her boots, voice quiet. You make it hard not to believe you. Good, he said, stepping back with a nod. Because I've never lied to you. Later that day, Jessa patched a tear in one of the ranch hands' wool coats by the stove in the cookhouse. Her needle moved steady, but her thoughts drifted. When supper was done and the dishes scrubbed, she stepped into the yard, where the early dark had already settled. The stars were coming out. Waylon was adjusting the latch on the barn door, lantern swinging in his hand. When he saw her, he didn't speak, just waited. She crossed the yard slowly. I read the letter, she said. He paused. Everything all right. She wants me to come home for Christmas. Says there's a widower in town with 2 children and a general store and I'd be comfortable. Is that what you want? Jessa looked up at him. No, then don't go, he said simply. I won't. They stood in silence, the wind rustling the bare branches along the fence line. The lantern's glow lit the corner of his jaw, the edge of his collar. I've never had comfort, she said, but I think I've found something better. Waylon set the lantern down, stepped closer. What's that? Belonging. His breath came out slow. You belong here, Jessa Mae. Every day I see it clearer. She reached out, fingers brushing his coat sleeve, not needing to say more. He covered her hand with his. The wind moved around them, but neither flinched from it. Not anymore. The first snow held through December, crusting the hills and sagging the pine boughs outside Cold Creek like the quiet weight of a held breath. Jessa stood in the barn's tack room that morning, sorting through a pile of worn leather harnesses and reins, her fingers stiff from the cold and long use. Light filtered through the cracks in the boards, silver and thin, and breath hovered in the air in small clouds. She had taken to mending gear between her sewing orders, and Waylon had started leaving things for her to fix without being asked. She ran her fingers along a split in a bridle strap, then reached for the awl and thread. Outside, the low hum of cattle shifting in the pasture carried over the frozen ground. She'd begun to know their sounds when they were restless, when they were content. It settled something inside her to listen. A bootstep crossed the threshold. Not rushed, not heavy. She didn't look up. You're getting good at that, Waylon said, brushing snow off his coat. I've had practice with stubborn things, she answered, threading the needle. He leaned against the doorframe, glancing at the harness. Some of those have been here longer than me. You'd think we'd have tossed them by now. Not if they can still be made useful. Waylon studied her a moment. You ever think about keeping a place of your own again? She paused in her stitching. Not since I arrived. I ask because old Mr. Carver's cabin on the edge of the far pasture's still standing. Needs a roof patch and a new stovepipe, but it's dry. No one's touched it since his nephew moved east. I don't need my own cabin. Didn't say you needed it, just that it's there." She set the bridle aside, flexing her hands. "You offering it to me, I'm offering to fix it up if you want it." She crossed her arms, not defensive, just weighing. "And if I say yes, is that your way of pushing me further off?" Waylon stepped forward, closing the space between them to a breath. "No, it's my way of giving you something that's yours, not borrowed, not temporary, not held together because you owe anyone anything." Jessa blinked once. "You think I don't already feel that here? I think you deserve the choice." She held his gaze. There was something in it, an invitation made without pressure, a respect that asked nothing back. She nodded once. "Then help me make it livable." They spent the following days hauling scrap from the cabin, lifting warped floorboards and salvaging what could be kept. The roof took 2 afternoons to mend, with Waylon hammering planks while she fed the fire below. She found an old rocking chair in the loft of the barn and began sanding it down in the evenings, her hands blackened with dust, her thoughts quiet. One night, after the last board had been nailed and the chimney cleared, they sat on the front step, watching the frost settle in the meadow. She wore her coat buttoned to her throat, but her cheeks were flushed from the work. Waylon passed her a tin mug filled with broth. "You always this good with your hands. I've always liked making things whole. Doesn't matter if it's cloth or wood or a person." He sipped his own. "You made me quieter." "That a bad thing?" "No," he said. "It's the first time I've felt like stillness didn't mean being alone." She looked at him then. "I used to think I'd spend the rest of my life trying to be wanted again." Waylon turned toward her, his voice low. "You don't have to try with me, you just have to stay." She reached out, not hesitating, and took his hand. "You really mean that?" she asked. "I mean to ask you something soon," he said, "but I won't unless I know you want me to." "I want you to," she said. The cold didn't seem to bite as hard after that. By the end of the week, she'd moved into the cabin. Her mending work stayed steady, and she kept riding out with Waylon to check the herd, splitting the labor with an ease that surprised them both. They didn't speak often when they rode, but something passed between them in those silences, a trust that didn't need words to settle. One evening, as the last light softened the snow-covered fields, Waylon waited by the cabin with something bundled in cloth. She stepped outside, brushing flour from her sleeves. "What's this?" she asked. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a carved wooden box. Rough-hewn but smoothed at the edges with a simple latch. "Made it from the leftover floorboards. Thought you might need a place to keep things," he said. She opened the lid. Inside was a length of blue calico, new, not salvaged. "I saw it at the mercantile last week. Figured it'd look good on you." She touched the fabric, then looked at him. "You did all this without asking. I figured you'd tell me if I overstepped." She closed the box, hands resting on the lid. "No one's made me anything in a long time." "I'll keep doing it," Waylon said. "If it means you'll keep staying." She stepped close and laid her hand on his chest, just above his heart. "Then you'd best build something stronger. I'm not planning to leave." He leaned in, slow, like he was waiting for her to change her mind. She didn't. Their foreheads touched first, then their lips. And in that moment, beneath the quiet hush of snow settling on the eaves, everything that had once felt like loss turned into something steady and warm and finally hers. January settled in with a patience that felt almost deliberate, laying down a stillness that reached even the bones of the land. There was no wind for days, only the hush of snow falling from branches and the low groan of timbers shifting under ice. Jessa kept a fire crackling in the iron stove, and stitched by lamplight in the cabin, Waylon had helped her make her own. She hung her dresses on nails by the door, her needles in a tin on the window ledge, and the blue calico waited folded on the shelf, untouched for now. On the 4th day of deep cold, A knock came just after dawn. She opened the door to find Waylon holding a canvas roll of maps under one arm and a pair of thick wool gloves in his other hand. "You busy?" he asked, eyes bright from the cold. "I was about to bake." "Good. Bring something warm and come with me." He didn't say more, and she didn't press. She wrapped a loaf in cloth, bundled herself, and followed him past the barn, over the rise behind the bunkhouse, and into the line of trees that bordered the eastern edge of the property. Snow reached to their calves, but it was dry and powdery, easy enough to walk through with care. He led her to a small clearing she hadn't seen before, where the land dipped into a shallow bowl and a frozen stream cut wide through the center. The trees broke just enough to let the sun in, pale and low. "This is mine," Waylon said, unrolling one of the maps and spreading it on a flat stump. "My uncle left me this stretch, 5 acres clear, 30 more wooded." She crouched beside him, brushing snow from the edge of the canvas. "Why haven't you built on it?" "I never had a reason to before." She looked up, waiting. "I want to raise sheep out here," he said. "Small grazing barn, maybe a stone house if I can learn how to lay it right. Not yet, but come spring. I've been drawing it out for years." She ran her fingers over the lines he'd inked, rough outlines of fences, a grove of trees he'd marked apple. "I want to build it with you, Jessa, not just the house. A life." She didn't speak right away. The only sound was the crunch of snow settling from branches above. "I don't know sheep," she said finally. "I'll teach you. I've never lived in stone walls. They'll hold better than wood." She folded the map carefully, smoothing the creases. "Then we'll need good mortar." They stood together in the clearing, the sun catching on the frost in her hair. Jessa reached into her coat and handed him the bread. He took it without a word, and they sat on the stump and shared it while the sky lightened to a pale gold overhead. Later that afternoon, back at the cabin, she opened the folded calico and ran her palm over the fabric. She cut a length, measured it against the curve of her shoulder, and began to sew. Not a dress for show, but a work apron, something that would last through lambing season and long days at the stove. Waylon stopped by just after nightfall, a curl of sawdust still caught in the cuff of his sleeve. "You hungry?" she asked, not looking up from her stitching. "I could be." She set the needle aside and ladled stew into 2 bowls. They ate at the small table, knees brushing beneath it, the silence between them easy. He glanced at her hands. "You always sew like that." "So focused. I trust my hands more than my thoughts sometimes." He leaned back in his chair. "I never asked what your first husband was like." She wiped her mouth and set her spoon down. "He was kind. He worked hard, but we married because it was expected, not because it ever settled right. When he died, I mourned the comfort, not the man." Waylon took that in without judgment. "I'd rather have something built slow and true than fast and hollow." Jessa nodded once. "So would I." He rose, fetched another log for the stove, and crouched to place it carefully. The fire flared, casting flickers of gold across the floorboards. "I'll start clearing the land next week," he said. "You don't have to be there, but I'd like you to be." "I will be." He turned toward her, firelight warm on his face. "When I say I want to build with you, I mean all of it. If we grow old together, I want it to be from shared work, not just shared days." She stood and crossed to him without hesitation. "Then you'd better teach me about sheep," she said, voice low, "because I plan on being there long after the walls are up." He reached for her hand. She let him. And between them, something steady and unshakable took root, quiet as snow but twice as lasting. Snowmelt came slow that year. The first signs of thaw revealed themselves not in the fields, but in the sounds, the steady drip from eaves, the muffled creak of trees loosening their grip on winter. Mud clung thick to boots, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth, sharp and full of promise. Jessa stood in the grove Waylon had once marked for fruit trees, her apron dusted with ash from the morning's hearth clean out. She held a seedling wrapped in burlap, its roots still damp from the bucket she'd used to soak them. Waylon knelt nearby, digging out a shallow trench with a worn spade, his sleeves rolled past his elbows, revealing the pale skin of winter unused to sun. "You sure it'll take?" she asked, brushing mud from the heel of her boot. "It's a gamble," he said, "but the soil's good, and if it doesn't, we'll plant again next year." Jessa lowered the sapling carefully, guiding the roots into place. "Feels strange, putting something in the ground just as everything's still trying to wake up." "That's when it matters most," Waylon said. "You plant when the earth's still tender. That's when it listens." She packed the soil in gently, then stepped back to watch him tamp it firm with the flat of the spade. They worked in rhythm now, without coordinating, without needing to explain. A kind of wordless knowing had grown between them over the past weeks, built not of grand moments, but the 100 quiet choices of daily life. The sheep arrived mid-March, brought in by a local herder who owed Waylon's uncle a favor from years back. An even dozen, skittish and lean. Jessa helped build the low fence around the pasture, her palms blistered by the end of the third day. She didn't complain. She'd started tying her hair back with a strip of the blue calico, hadn't yet sewn the dress, but she liked the way the color caught the light when the wind turned. One evening, after a long day of clearing brush, she found Waylon in the half-built barn, sitting on a low beam with a book in his hands. He looked up as she entered. "You read poetry?" she asked, surprised. "Only when I'm too tired for anything useful. Read something to me." He hesitated, then turned the page and read aloud, voice low and rough-edged. The words were plain ones about land and time and the turning of seasons. She sat beside him, legs stretched out, spine resting against the barn wall, and listened without speaking, her head tilted toward the sound of him. When he finished, he closed the book gently. "You ever think about what comes next?" Jessa watched the last light slip through the cracks in the boards. "I think about planting more, maybe a kitchen garden. I think about making things that last." Waylon turned to her. "I want to marry you." There was no fanfare in it, just the truth, offered clean. She met his eyes. "Why now?" "Because I've never been more sure of anything. Because I don't want to build another day of this life without your name beside mine." She reached for his hand, fingers rough from work, warm despite the chill. "Then let's make it official." They married at the edge of the pasture, under a sky swept clean by wind, with only the ranch hands and Mrs. Halpern for witnesses. Jessa wore a dress she'd sewn from cream linen, the blue calico folded into a sash at her waist. Waylon wore his best shirt and the boots he'd polished with tallow until the leather shone. Mrs. Halpern handed them a pair of copper rings, plain, handmade, and true. Afterward, they shared stew and fresh cornbread at the long table behind the barn. Someone played a fiddle, off-key but joyful, and Jessa laughed when Waylon pulled her into a slow, swaying dance under the open sky. That night, in the cabin they'd built together, Jessa stepped out to fetch more firewood. She paused on the porch, breath curling in the air, and looked out over the dark shape of the field. The sapling stood alone by the stream, its branches bare but upright. She watched it a long while before turning to the man waiting inside. Years passed. The grove filled with blossoms come spring. The sheep multiplied. Jessa taught herself how to make cheese, and Waylon built a smokehouse behind the barn. They added a loft to the cabin, then a second room. When the first child came, a girl with her father's quiet eyes and her mother's sure hands. They named her Ruth. Jessa never went back to Kansas. She never opened another letter from her sister, though she kept them in a box beneath the bed, tied with string. She didn't need to explain her happiness to anyone. The stone house they'd dreamed of took 5 years to finish. They moved into it with worn boots and full hearts. And on the mantel, beside a carved sheep whistle Waylon had made, Jessa placed the wooden box he'd given her that first winter, still holding the folded piece of blue calico. They grew old without noticing it, much just the way hands grew slower, and the work took longer, and the evenings were quieter than before. But the love between them never settled. It deepened, like water fed by the roots of everything they had planted together. And when Ruth married and had children of her own, Jessa stood beneath the same tree they'd planted that first spring and watched her granddaughter chase lambs through the tall grass. Waylon came to stand beside her, his hand closing gently around hers. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had built something real, and it held.